Hi, my name is Michael Graff of Pro Income here in Walpole, Massachusetts. And today I want to discuss government spending trends and the impact on your taxes, especially in retirement. I first want to ask for your patience as I go through the numbers that I'm about to present. I must warn you that this is not the most exciting of topics on the surface, but the impact on how much you will pay in taxes, both income and estate, could be staggering. So please bear with me for the next few minutes as I go through this. Okay, so each year the Congressional Budget Office publishes data on federal government revenue and expenditures. Here is the data for fiscal year 2023. This report tracks all the tax revenue collected and then ultimately spent. Don't worry if you can't read all these numbers. I really just want you to know that all the revenue and expenditures are tracked by category. Let's look at some specific numbers. Let's start by looking at the government's revenue and spending. In fiscal year 23, our government took in $4.4 trillion in revenue. Over half of that came from individual income taxes. Now let's look at how we spent that money. First, mandatory spending, which is spending codified in current law. This includes things like Social Security benefits and Medicare spending, among other things. Our federal government spent about $3.8 trillion in this category. Next, let's look at net interest on the federal debt. Our federal government spent about $600 billion on interest on the debt. That adds up to $4.4 trillion in non-discretionary spending. So basically, our government took in $4.4 trillion in revenue and, before Congress even passed a single spending bill, had spent all on non-discretionary needs. Now let's look at discretionary spending, which is allocated by Congress. This covers things like defense, education, and a whole slew of other government agencies and projects. Our federal government spent around $1.7 trillion in discretionary spending, for a total of around $6.1 trillion. That leaves a $1.7 trillion gap between what the government brought in via tax revenues and then what it spent. This is what makes up our annual deficit. Running a deficit each year is part of what is growing our national debt. So, where might the government look to balance this equation? Well, let's look at mandatory spending. However, 2/3 of federal spending is mandatory and in categories that mean a lot to all of us, especially retirees, including Social Security and Medicare, two programs primarily used by people, in their retirement years over age 65. So that's mandatory spending. Let's look at net interest on the debt now. In calendar year 23, the total amount allocated to debt service was almost $1 trillion. As long as our national debt stays large and interest rates remain higher, it will be very hard to reduce the interest that we ultimately pay on the debt. So what else? What about discretionary spending? Well, Congress could allocate less money here. These are the various discretionary spending categories, including defense, veterans benefits, education, transportation, etc. Frankly, it's hard to see how any of these can be meaningfully reduced, especially with such divisive partisan politics in Washington these days. So it may be hard to significantly reduce discretionary spending. Based on proposed 2024 spending and estimated tax revenues, the deficit is still projected to be in about that $1.7 trillion range. Congress has also passed bills over the past few years to allocate additional dollars outside the appropriations process. This includes special spending bills like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Transportation Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which leaves only one part of this equation for Congress to consider, and that is raising revenues to offset higher spending. which could and probably does mean increased taxes. Now, I'm not saying the taxes will absolutely be higher in the future, but let me put this to you. With the national debt ballooning to more than $35 trillion with no end in sight, what is your opinion about the future of tax rates? Higher or lower, as the politicians seem to be promising? The point I want to make is that as much as politicians promise lower taxes, the numbers we have been discussing here are really hard to argue with. This means that you, as a taxpayer, had better fashion a tax plan that helps you to efficiently manage and ultimately reduce the amount of income and estate taxes that you will likely pay. Start the tax planning process by learning more about what you will likely pay in retirement. I can't emphasize this enough. You're going to pay a lot in taxes in retirement, and this is an opportunity to glimpse just how much that could be. Go to this website for a customized analysis. It's www.notaxbill.com. Again, my name is Michael Graff, and my phone is 781-248-7344. And also, here's my email address. I want you to reach out to me with any of your tax questions and any other questions for that matter. Please don't take this matter lightly, and don't put it off. Start your tax planning now. It's really important. Thanks for your attention. Much appreciated.